Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody again to another stream of the Thought Adventure podcast. Today we have a special episode where we're going to be talking to Ridwan, also known as the Apostate Prophet on YouTube, about the existence of God. We're happy to have you. How are you doing, Ridwan?
Good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you guys invited me here. I appreciate it.
Thanks. So, and the panelists, of course, the usuals. There's Jake, there's Sharif. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. So I want to say a few things about the topic, but before that, I want to say a couple of things about the mess that's going on in the live chat. We've got a lot of mods in, and we've got Muslim mods, we've got Christian mods, we've got atheist mods, all kinds of mods. So whatever your faith is, whatever you believe, keep it respectful to everybody else, or you probably will be muted. Okay, so we just want to keep this discussion a respectful, open discussion about the topic at hand. So about the topic, we're discussing the existence of God. Is it justified to believe in one God? And some might see or some might allude to the idea that this is not a topic about Islam. And we touched about this in our last stream about the oneness of God and arguments for the oneness of God. And I just want to make it very clear that that doesn't seem to be a coherent view to me, right? If I'm talking to you about something like the theory of evolution, right, and I want to prove it to you, I want to tell you that it's a well-established theory, and I tell you, hey, let's have a stream and talk about natural selection and how it works, and you tell me, no, I want to talk directly about evolution, then you don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? So discussions about the oneness of God and whatever concept of God you're proposing as it lines up with a specific religion is a discussion about that religion, and it is a significant part of the evidence that a theist would like to use as proof for his religion. So now that we've got that out of the way, I want to give the floor to Jake to maybe say
we have Yusuf that just joined as well.
Assalamu alaikum, Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa
alaikum salam. So maybe Jake, you can say a few words about the topic and just get us started.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously the question of whether or not God exists is, I think, an important philosophical question. And, I think we should kind of just get straight into it because I'm not that familiar with Ridwan's views. So I think by asking questions, we can maybe learn a little bit about what his perspective is and then proceed from there. I know that he wanted to make some comments as well, but I'm going to ask my question and then he could address the live chat if he wants to. But so my first question, and this is how I see things as foundational and sort of a fundamental question. I'm wondering from you if you think that a necessary being is possible.
Okay. I want to address that quickly. I just want to say those few words, if that is okay with you. I want to say I am very thankful, very grateful that you guys invited me here. It was actually a big surprise to me. I appreciate it very much. Happy to join. I'm happy to have a peaceful, respectful conversation. I want to say quickly, I don't care at all about power struggles, exerting my power over you or you over me, humiliating you, you humiliating me, and all that. And I know that there are lots of people in the live chat on your side or on my side who expect that I will humiliate you or you will humiliate me and all that. I really don't care about any of that stuff. Name calling and all that, it doesn't contribute in any way at all. I'm sick of the hate. I've come today here to really have a reasonable exchange, to listen to you guys. I would like you to listen to me. Honestly, I have mentioned it before we went live. I have actually went through, I've gone through 2 streams on this channel. I've watched them through just to get an idea of who you guys are, what you're doing, and all that. So I am here for a good purpose. So I would also invite everyone to just be completely open-minded and calm and respectful. I definitely will do that from my side. If I come to your question, Jake, thank you. Do I believe that a necessary being is possible? I believe that when you mean necessary being, you are kind of appealing to what is known in the ontological argument as the necessary greatest being, or in the Kalam cosmological argument, is that a combination of those, that there must be a being at the very beginning, or that there must be a being that is greater than everything else. If you mean that, I would say it is a question that I cannot really directly answer, because we don't really exactly have a definition of what we mean by a necessary being. We don't know what to expect from this necessary being. We can't really specify and define this necessary being. Depending on what definition do we seek this necessary being? Is it greater? What does greater mean? And all that. So I would like you to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about in terms of greatness. So obviously when I say being, a being is just something that exists. So it could be anything. It could be a rock. It could be a person. It could be anything. A being is literally anything that exists. But on the necessary part, you mentioned that I guess either you don't have a good handle on that, or you don't think anybody does. I don't know. How do you understand the term necessary in that context when we say a necessary being? How do you understand it?
Well, as I understand it, what you are asking is that something must exist, or something must pre-exist in order for other things to exist. Do you want to clarify that or correct me on that?
Yeah, so I mean, something that's necessary just means that it couldn't fail to exist. So the negation of it is impossible. So that's what it means for it to be necessary.
Okay.
So,
yeah, it's a very vague question and a very vague definition to me. I mean, we for a fact know that we exist. I know that I exist. So we know that the world around us exists. We have speculations about what may exist beyond that. I simply do not understand where we would exactly get with that question. I don't know.
It's really important, because obviously we view God as a necessary being, but you could have other things that are necessary that are not God. That's also a possibility. And so if we can't even agree on whether or not a necessary being exists or is even possible, then I don't think we can really get anywhere. So that's why I think we need to define what we're actually talking about. And I mean, obviously we think a necessary being exists, right? So that's obvious, but I want to understand your perspective as far as whether you think, well, it's possible, meaning that, it could exist, or you think it's impossible, that it couldn't possibly exist, or maybe that you just don't know one way or another. I mean, those are really the only three options that I see.
To be very honest, I think it is rather irrelevant to me. I think it is irrelevant to the question of God at hand. And it really, again, depends on what exactly you would aim for by specifying and clarifying this necessary being, by making it necessary. What exactly would you aim for? I mean, what is your exact what is the purpose of you defining a necessary being in terms of the existence of one God?
Because we believe that God is necessary. So
Why?
obviously, what's that?
Why?
Yeah, but the point why I'm asking you the question is because if we have the position that God is necessary, and you don't think that anything that exists could be necessary, then obviously we can't get anywhere. We have to start out at that point. So that's how I see it.
If you mean, I don't think. I don't know. It's a question that I largely consider irrelevant, to be very honest.
Okay, so let me ask you this: before you came on this stream, had you ever even thought about this question?
I have.
Okay,
I have.
and so
I think it's not largely irrelevant. Yeah.
Okay, so then you need to explain why you don't think it's relevant, because I'm explaining to you why it is, but why don't you think it's relevant?
Well, you haven't really explained to me why it is relevant.
I did. I said that we believe in God. The discussion is about whether or not God exists. God is a necessary being, so he's in the category of necessary. And if you don't think necessary being is even possible, well, then obviously you don't think God is possible.
Okay, but why exactly is God necessary? Why specifically is God necessary?
God is necessary because he couldn't fail to exist.
According to who? According to what? What that is your definition of God and your specific expectation of God.
Yeah, but that's the point. We haven't gone into the argument as to why we think that God is the necessary being. Before we even get there, I have to have your understanding of whether or not you think such a thing is even possible.
Well, maybe we should first define that in order to then understand and to then conclude whether such a thing is possible.
Yeah,
I mean,
at
this point, I just do not think that is a proper place to start at. I simply do not. I mean, what we have is a space that we see existing before us, and all the things that we see exist in this within this space. It is largely irrelevant to me to speculate endlessly on whether all of these things must or must not exist, or whether without all of this there must be something fundamental that must necessarily exist. It is simply not really relevant to me as I see it now. If you can change my mind on this, I'm happy to discuss that.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Well, you asked me to define it. Well, first I asked you what your understanding was, then I gave my definition of a necessary being. A necessary being is just something that exists, that couldn't fail to exist. It couldn't be another way. It exists in all possible worlds. This is what a necessary being is in philosophical terms. So, I mean, I don't know how to get any clearer on the definition.
I would very honestly argue that I think that the question is quite irrelevant. I think it relies very much on sophistry, on assumptions, and it doesn't, in my opinion, add anything to the question of whether God exists or not.
So you think to ask you whether or not you think a necessary being is possible is totally irrelevant in sophistry? I don't understand how you come to that conclusion.
I think it is quite irrelevant, to be very honest.
Yeah. It's fundamental to the entire discussion. I mean, it's not only that theists have these discussions, atheist philosophers have these discussions about whether or not a necessary being is possible. If it is, what the nature of the necessary being would be. These are. It's not like I'm just pulling this out of my hat. I mean,
I understand, but the thing is, it is a question that doesn't lead us anywhere at all. It completely relies on.
I think it will lead us somewhere. I do. I think it will lead us somewhere.
Let's skip it and see it. I do not think that it leads us anywhere. I think that I think we can speculate endlessly about whether it must or must not exist, what it is and what it is not, and all that. But it doesn't lead us anywhere in terms of the belief in. When we look at the title of this stream, for example, the belief in one God, I don't think it leads us anywhere close to that, not even remotely.
Yeah, and I think it does, but maybe because you don't see what's going to maybe come down the pipeline, you don't understand it. But you still could answer the question because you understand what the question is. Is a necessary being possible? You understand what the term necessary being is. You understand what the term possible is. You understand that there's three answers. It's yes, no, or I don't know. And I just don't see. You could simply say I don't know, and that would be fine.
I don't know. Let's skip it with that. I don't know.
Okay, so that's fine that you don't know. And now I'll explain to you my position of why, maybe in some more detail, as to why I think it is relevant, and whether or not you think it's possible or not. So when I'm asking the question whether or not it's possible, something that is impossible is just logically contradictory. So if I say, well, I've got a square circle in my pocket, you're not even going to be waiting to look to see what it is because that's just ridiculous. Or if I say, oh, look, hey, there's a married bachelor over there. Do you see that guy? People are going to look at me crazy. So these things are contradiction in terms. Now, is a necessary being in that same light that it's literally contradictory? Or is it possible, meaning that it is logically possible? There's nothing utterly contradictory about it. That's what the whole question is. Now, if you're saying that you don't know, I just find that a little bit interesting because I think you should be able to tell whether or not it's actually a contradiction in terms?
I think it very much depends on how you actually define that necessary being. When we talk about God specifically, we are talking about something. Yeah, okay, yes, maybe it is possible. Maybe it is possible for that being to exist, a necessary being to exist. You define that necessary based on certain assumptions, based on certain thoughts and supposed evidences that you make along the way, and then decide that this being is necessary and that it is therefore that it must therefore or can therefore exist. But we are making a lot of assumptions until we get to the conclusion that God is a necessary being.
I'm not even talking about God.
That. I mean, I know. The thing is, in the back of my head, I know that we're talking about God when we talk about a necessary being.
But I'm not talking about God.
A necessary
being
could be anything. It must be defined first before we can say whether it does or does not exist, or whether we can or cannot know that.
Yeah, but Ridvan, I'm not excluding this to God alone. I'm saying I can give you examples of other things that maybe even an atheist would consider necessary, something like matter and energy, or maybe the initial state of the universe. You could say that that's necessary. I'm perfectly fine with that. So I'm not restricting it to whether or not God exists. Like, okay, there's this category that's necessary being that God could be a part of, but there could be other things that it's not God, and that these other things are the actual necessary being, something like matter and energy or the initial state of the universe. And so from your paradigm, I'm wondering even if something like that is possibly necessary.
Well, as said, I would stick with it may or may not exist. Because especially if we look beyond what we understand from our universe right now, and where our universe originates, how it is formed, and all that, there is a lot of stuff that we do not understand at all. There are, as said, a lot of assumptions that we will make along the way. There are a lot of contradictory things that are at the end or at the beginning, as depending on how you see it, that may be considered necessary. But we have to define them in order to understand whether they can or cannot exist. Therefore, I cannot make any proper assumptions on that. Others, more knowledgeable experts, may do that. Good for them. I do not think that I'm in any position to make any speculations about that.
Okay, so I mean, the opposite of something that's necessary is something that's contingent, which means it could be another way, it could fail to exist. Mm-hmm. I mean, a common example would be something like this microphone. Do you accept that there are contingent things? Or you wouldn't even make a claim about whether or not anything is contingent or necessary?
I simply do not think that it is irrelevant to the point at hand. I mean, we are talking about the belief in one God and whether it is justified. I feel like when we talk about these questions, we are spending a lot of time on something that will not lead us anywhere within these 2 hours that we have ahead of us, because they do not add to or take anything away from the discussion that we are supposed to have today.
Yeah, I think they do, though. But I mean, are you telling me that you cannot tell me whether or not this pen is necessary or contingent?
It is completely irrelevant to me.
Yeah, but
it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the discussion. I mean, I may ask you questions that you will simply dismiss. For example, I can ask you questions about further in the discussion on what God or Allah did in the time before He created us. And I saw on one of the streams, for example, that the conclusion was that there are certain things that we can simply not understand, which is why we should not speculate on them, or why we should not make certain clear conclusions and assumptions about them, but simply move on from them. Similarly, this, from my point of view, from my perspective, is not something that is necessary or relevant to the discussion. It is simply a waste of time, to be very honest to me.
Well, I mean, I can easily answer that question, and maybe when you have your time to answer questions, you can ask me that or one of the other guys. But I think it is relevant because there's a common argument that theists use, which is called the contingency argument, which is part of what I'm actually talking about now. And we talk about modality. So there's things that are contingent, there's things that are necessary, and there's things that are impossible. These are three categories of thought. And if forget about necessary being. I tried to move on to something more mundane like my pen. If you cannot even commit to a position about whether or not my pen is necessary or contingent, I don't think we're really going to get anywhere. So I think it is foundational.
Well, I think we could get anywhere if we actually focused on things that matter. To be very honest, when I think about religion and I think about the one God, I think that common arguments on the nature of the universe, the nature of being, the origin of the universe, the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the design argument are all a giant waste of time that have not really convinced anybody except maybe for very few exceptions.
Can I just bring some direction to the discussion?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, and Jake is going to continue because this is a good back and forth. But about you not thinking a certain question is relevant, right? Whether or not the question is relevant might be a subjective thing, or it might be something that maybe you need to take the time to, reason with the person who's asking you the question, see their point of view, see where he's going. Maybe he's coming from somewhere where this particular question is relevant. I understand you might not see it as relevant, but you need to take the idea seriously in the same way. Like if I see something like the problem of evil as irrelevant, I'm still going to take your idea seriously. If you ask me questions, I'm going to answer them. I'm not going to just sweep them under the carpet and say, hey, this question seems irrelevant to me. Let's talk about the contingency argument, because these philosophical discussions about evil aren't going to take us anywhere. I might think that, but in order to be a serious interlocutor, I must take your idea seriously. So Jake is taking you down a train of thought here. I would just urge you to take his questions seriously, even if you don't see them as relevant. And he is trying to take you somewhere with these questions. It is a certain line of reasoning that will have a conclusion that we're going to talk about. So let's take each other's questions seriously is what I'm trying to say.
Can I say something about that? The reason that I do not think it is useful to indulge in these in these questions and in this line of argumentation is that, for example, before the stream when we arranged this, I also for myself specified that I do not really concern myself with whether God must or must not exist, and that I do not focus on this, that I do not argue about this, and that I do not think that it is relevant to the question. I do not think it is relevant to religion. I simply do not think that this plays any role in what we are doing here. I don't think that this is not the reason why I do or do not believe in God, for example. My reasons are entirely different and focus on completely different standards, which this is something that I simply, I don't know. I do not think that it is useful to be indulging in that. And
I understand that that's your perspective, and I respect it. That's okay. But then I'm just telling you to think from someone else's perspective, who you would be coming forward with a particular argument you use against the existence of God or against theism or Islam, and they just sweep it under the carpet and be like, that's not important. Let me talk about this other important thing that is relevant. Well, that other thing is going to be relevant to him because it's the reason he believes. And for you, this thing is not relevant because it's not the reason you disbelieve. But then in order for the conversation to be fruitful, you need to take your interlocutor's reasons seriously, even if you initially find them irrelevant. That's what I'm saying. So if you come to me with something that I feel is irrelevant with regard to the existence of God or truth of Islam, I will take it seriously. I will engage with it. So I'm just saying, because yes, you're right. We have 2 hours ahead of us. So let's take each other's questions seriously and answer them honestly. I mean, you could just say you don't know, and Jake can move on, or you can ask him to give his view.
Well, here's the thing: if you come to me and argue with me about veganism and why I do not think that veganism is reasonable, and start asking me questions about it, I will feel like why exactly are we talking about this? That's not
true. Yeah, but then come on. I mean, you got to see there's a difference a difference when we're talking about.
But if I say to you, hey, I think veganism is clearly wrong, let us discuss this. Then we may be open to going through the different argumentation and different perspectives of that. But that is not what we're doing. That is not what I'm doing, to be very honest.
Yeah, but Ridwan,
hold on a second. Abdul, let me just try to come back to this.
Okay.
Yeah. I understand you don't see it as relevant. It's not relevant to you. But what Abdul was trying to explain is that it is relevant to me. So if it is, even if you think it's the dumbest thing in the world, if part of the reason that I actually believe that God exists is because of this pen, and then I can try to explain it to you, that I think you should try to engage with the conversation. Now, I'm going to try this one more time, and if it doesn't work, I'm happy to let the other people come in and we can continue on another line of thought. But are you trying to tell me right now that you, based on what I said, and let me explain it one more time. So something that's necessary means that it has to exist. It couldn't be otherwise. It couldn't fail to exist. Something that's contingent is the opposite of it, that it could be another way. It doesn't have to exist. Now, if you have those two categories, there's a third, which is impossible, but I don't think you're going to tell me that the pen doesn't actually exist. So let's just get rid of that. If we're dealing with necessary and possible, or I'm sorry, necessary and contingent, which is possible, are you trying to tell me that you cannot tell me whether or not this pen right here is necessary or contingent?
It is something that does not that I do not think about, that I do not concern myself with. That is what I'm trying to tell you. When we talk about necessary being, when we talk about contingency and all that, it is something that I do not concern myself with at all, and that I do not have an opinion on, that I do not think about. I can go ahead and answer your question. Necessary being, yeah, may or may not exist. Yeah, pen, contingent, may be, yeah. But I simply don't understand where we go with here. I mean, we can move on from this if you want to. I can simply give you vague answers to this. Yes, maybe, and yes, maybe.
Yeah, so you're just going to say you don't know. Well, what I tried to do is I started off with the necessary being. Obviously, that didn't work. I tried to and I don't mean this in a bad way, but dumb it down to a pen to try to get a handle. Well, whether you can give me an answer about the pen, whether or not it's necessary or contingent. But if you can't do it, even that, then yeah, I can't proceed. And Sharif, if you want to continue with another,
are you saying that the existence of God and whether we believe in God or not depends on whether we can or cannot answer these specific questions?
Yes.
Necessary. That is extremely absurd.
It's fundamental to the entire thing. Now, I can actually explain if you want to give me 5 minutes to explain what my actual argument is. I can, but honestly, I don't even think it's worth it, because if I do, I mean, you still can't tell me about the pen. So, I mean,
go ahead, please.
So the point is this. It's simple as this. Okay, I asked you if a necessary being is possible. Okay, if you commit to the idea that a necessary being is possible, well, what a necessary being means is that it exists in all possible worlds. Okay, so if a necessary being is possible, meaning that it exists in some possible world, then by definition, it also exists in all possible worlds, which means that a necessary being exists. This does not mean that the necessary being is God. It could be this pen, which is absurd. I don't think the necessary being is the pen, but it could be, and it could be matter, energy, or some configuration of it, or maybe the first state of the universe, if you think there's one, any of those things. The point is that based on modal logic, S5 logic, and I don't need to go into much detail about this, philosophers pretty much agree on this, is that once you say that a necessary being is possible, that it then entails that the necessary being actually exists. Now, whether or not that's God or something else, that's the further question down the line. But if we can't even get clear on whether or not it's possible, then we can't get to the conclusion that a necessary being exists. And there's many atheists, and see, atheists maybe have a misunderstanding, think, oh, well, he's trying to trap them into understanding or committing to the idea that God exists. No, it's not like that. For example, Graham Oppy, who's a very famous English-speaking philosopher, who's, in my opinion, one of the best atheist philosophers today, he believes that there's a necessary being, but he doesn't believe that that necessary being is God, and that's perfectly fine. And he gets to that same conclusion based on similar rationale that I have just explained. And so I don't think it's irrelevant, because we need to get to what's called stage one of cosmological arguments, which is whether or not a necessary being exists, which Graham Oppy and I, even though he's an atheist, can agree on, and then we can discuss the nature of that necessary being. Okay, so that's how I'm getting to that point and why it's relevant.
Okay, maybe I was a little bit, I wasn't really open to the discussion because I generally consider it nonsensical. Maybe I was a little bit condescending. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that is a fault on my side. Might be true. I'm sorry about that. My point is, as said from the very beginning, we can agree that a necessary being exists, that it may or may not exist. We can agree that the pen is not that necessary being. We can agree that that is contingent. The issue is where we get from this, the end result of this will be that there must be a being, or that there probably is a being. And from then on, we will discuss about the specifications and the definitions, the conditions of that being, which completely render this discussion irrelevant. I do not really make a statement or express a view. You have not heard my view on what I think is out there, on where I think the universe originates, on what I think caused the universe to exist, what is outside of this universe. I did not make any statements on that. I leave that up to speculation and do not make any assertions about that at all. I do not say that there is no necessary being, that there is no creator, there is no origin, there is no originator. I do not make any of these statements because, to me, they are largely irrelevant to the question of whether one God exists or not. But yes, if you want to go ahead with this, a necessary being may exist, and no, I don't think it's the pen. So where do we go with that?
Okay, yeah. So where we go with it is that if a necessary being exists, meaning that it's possible that a necessary being exists, then it necessarily follows that a necessary being does exist, because the definition of a necessary being is that it exists in all possible worlds and couldn't fail to exist. It just follows by necessity. And then we can discuss what the nature of this necessary being is. Is it something natural like matter and energy, or is it maybe something more like God? We can have that discussion. And I don't see how that's irrelevant. It's relevant.
Well, yeah, to me, as said, may or may not exist. I appreciate that you tell me that it can and therefore must exist. Thanks for the information. I think we should move on to the nature.
Yeah, but do you understand? Do you understand that if a necessary being is possible, that it follows by modal logic that the necessary being necessarily exists?
Well,
do you understand that?
It is in the question itself, yes, of course. The question itself assumes that a necessary being, if it can exist, then it must exist because it is necessary. I mean, just the words simply.
Right. So that's why it's relevant. And
yeah, but
the only two options is, if a necessary being is possible, then a necessary being necessarily exists. Your only other option is to say no, that it's impossible, in which case you'd have to show through logic that it's actually the concept itself is a logical contradiction or something of the sort. And then the burden of proof would be on you to demonstrate that. And I don't think you or pretty much any other atheist is able to do that. So that's why it's relevant. Now, when you, even if you just admit that a necessary being exists, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't mean that you've apostatized from atheism. You can still be an atheist and believe that something necessary exists, just as Graham Oppy does.
I simply think that the question itself is simply a setup. I mean, as far back as this whole argument goes, from the simplest forms, from Anselm's ontological argument, which from today's eyes could look pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, but his argument is about God. Mine is a modification of that, which is just merely about a necessary being, which most, as far as I understand it, even most atheist philosophers in the field generally accept that.
Okay, but I simply think that the question itself is fallacious. It assumes, it begs the question, it wants us to lead to a specific thing. I simply think, hey, I do not have an opinion on this. I think it is irrelevant. Okay. So that is my perspective on this. I think we should move on from that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to say one last thing, and then you guys can move on to maybe a different train of thought. But my whole thing is the fact of you, this is my personal opinion, the fact of you saying that it is irrelevant, you think it's begging the question, all this different terminology that you're using, I'm sorry to say, but I think it shows that you don't really understand the topic that well for you to make that claim that it's totally irrelevant to the discourse.
I do not make a claim here. But if you want to stick with that, I would like to also dig your opinion on the problem of hell, for example, afterwards, and then I would like to see what your response to that will be.
Yeah, sure, we can get to that. But on that note, Ridwan, the thing is, so again, I'm just going to reiterate a bit of what I said, because maybe we can bring Sharif into the discussion. He can have a back and forth with you. The thing about, this people are normally anxious to get to the conclusion. Give me the meat is what Aaron said when he was on our stream, right? So he wants to get to talk to me about God and good and evil and judgment and stuff like that. But I respectfully think that's just not taking your interlocutor's idea seriously. What Jake was trying to do, and I think what we should try to do on the stream, is walk you through a line of reasoning that shows you why we believe, because it's a question of justification, and justification is simply a matter of providing reasons for why you believe. That's what justification is. That's what, generally speaking, philosophers understand justification to be. So if I'm going to start at the top, that's what might be begging the question. And I'm going to start with the conclusion that God exists, and therefore you should follow everything in the Quran because Islam is true. That begs the question. What Jake is doing is the opposite. He's trying to build a case from the ground up. He's not starting with the conclusion. He's starting with premises that you do not find in the conclusion. If he's begging the question, you would find his premises in the conclusion. Now, the way necessity is defined here doesn't beg the question. Modal logic has developed a lot since Anselm. We've moved way beyond Anselm, and even Plantinga's modal, ontological argument isn't the last thing that we've progressed on. There's been work beyond that. So the way necessity and contingency is defined here isn't something that's exclusive to atheists that they use to try to, define God into existence. It's something that philosophers in general, theists and atheists alike, utilize in many different areas. So what Jake is asking you here is well known in philosophy, and it's not exclusive to religion. Right. So I just want us to start off by taking these ideas seriously. So again, just like I told you, if you bring up hell, I'm going to take that seriously, and I want you to do the same.
Can I say something?
Yeah, you can.
Go ahead.
I would like to explain where I even stand on the whole question of God, because I think we're going into where we're misunderstanding why we should or should not start here. I think, to be very honest, I always say that I certainly reject the one God. I reject the one God based on how we define the one God, based on the idea of the one God and how he is described and preached within these specific religions that preach the one God. To answer the question of the stream itself, I find it entirely justifiable to believe that there is a God, that there is one God, or that there are more gods, or that there is a creator, or that there is a non-conscious creator, a non-conscious origin. I completely agree that is justifiable. I myself, for different reasons, reject that idea as, I think, absurd and unnecessary. There is no reason for me to believe in that. But apart from that, how I see it is not that we have found the origin of everything and we have found that there is no originator and no causer. What I see is that we know very limited things. We know that the universe is expanding. We don't know how, and we don't know why that began. What comes beyond that is a matter of speculation. And it is okay for you to believe in God. It is okay for others to believe in multiple gods. It is okay for Taoists to believe in the Tao, which provides the flow of everything. That to me is not a matter that really matters, to be very honest. I disbelief in the one God. I reject the one God as false because the one God is based on specific religions and their teachings and preachings.
But
and
if I can ask you, Ridwan, because you're saying, sorry, just on this point, because the whole stream depends on it. The title is it justified to believe in one God? And I think it's assumed from the setup of the discussion that we're going to have a discussion where there's two angles to this. One where it's justified, another where it's not. Or are we on the same side here, so we can just talk about something else. Maybe I don't know.
Well, the thing is, this is the issue. That's why I'm saying maybe it should have been clarified in a better way. When we were setting up the stream, the initial invitation to me was that we would like to discuss the question of the existence of God and of Islam, and I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds great to me." So then we went into the talks, and it was said we should talk about the existence of God. And I said, "Yeah, I don't focus on that, but yeah, sure, we can." And then the title was set as "Is the belief in one God justified?" And I thought, yeah, I guess if that's what they want to go with, I guess.
Yeah,
we'll
but just to be clear, yeah, that's fine. But just to be clear, so do you believe that I can provide you with rational justification, proof, evidence for the existence of God, and I can hold a rational position in believing in one God, one creator? So that can be a rational position.
I believe it may be justifiable to believe that one creator.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to ask, what's your understanding of justification, so we don't speak past each other?
That it is reasonable to believe that you may have reason, or I don't think it is necessarily a synonym to. I don't think it implies certainty, but yeah. So you have solid reason to believe in what you are believing.
Would it be justified reason, Rizwan?
Would
Would you consider?
Depends.
Do you believe it's just? Do you believe?
Depends.
Let me be very specific with my question. Do you believe it's justified and reasonable, or a justified reasonable position to believe in one God?
Complicated question. Okay, I don't believe that we have concrete evidence to believe
you think it's
in
reasonable
the one God, but I think it may be reasonable for people to believe in that certain God because they don't know anything else.
I appreciate that, but so I don't want this discussion to continue because I think it's better, but I just want to point out, I hope that you can appreciate that I'm not coming on here and telling you that I believe in that God exists because my dog barked God or some kind of I had this strange experience or yeah. I'm trying to, and this is what our show tries to be about. We try to be philosophical and explain why we believe what we believe. We try to give rational reasons for it. And that's what I was attempting to do in the beginning, even if you thought my example was silly. But I hope that you can at least appreciate that. And maybe we can move on.
I appreciate that.
Sharif, to, I don't know if it was sexist or not.
I appreciate that.
Just because I want to bring Sharif in, but just so you don't talk past each other, and like I don't want Sharif to be to present you with a case that you already accept. You said it seems like you don't really take philosophical arguments seriously, but you're saying it is justified to believe in God. I'm still a bit confused. If Sharif, if you're clear on that, I'm good. But if you can. Maybe a clarification question. Do you believe a position like materialism is reasonable and justified?
I think it is reasonable, yeah.
In the same way belief in one God is reasonable and justified?
May even be more justified and reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, Abdul, they can be both. They can be both reasonable. You can say that. He can hold that position. And if he wants, that's his position. That's fine.
Exactly.
But honestly, that's fine for us because now we're getting somewhere. At least you're admitting or telling us that it could be the case. It's reasonable to believe it. That's fine. I mean,
so what I always say is I have no issue at all with the belief in God. And if people want to believe in God, if Christians want to believe in God, if Muslims want to believe in God, I completely understand that because people seek something. People have a lack of sufficient knowledge of the world. They seek answers for their meanings. And if that answer to them is God, I'm fine with it. I think they have they have reason to believe that God exists. When it comes to inviting me to believe in God, for example, I give responses to that and explain why I don't believe in God. And the reasons why I don't believe in God do not include things such as that there can be no originator or no necessary being.
Yeah. So you believe it's reasonable? Okay, go ahead, Sharif. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say. So, what is your position, Ridwan? Do you believe in God now? Are we convinced you here in this stream?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, so
I believe that you may believe.
Well, maybe. Yeah. So Why don't you believe in God? Why don't you believe in God? Why don't
Well,
you
I
believe in this
believe.
necessary being that has a will?
Okay, I do not believe in God because when I look at everything that we know so far in our existence, this is a question that requires a very long answer. I'm aware of that. You are aware of that, but I'll try to break it down to just a very few simple points. We are in a world full of ignorance. We exist. We try to find out the things around us. We have speculated for thousands of years, as we see historically. What we know so far, and mostly have found within the last 100 years, is that we are in a gigantic universe, as we call it. We have an observable universe as far as we can see, and in that observable universe, we have gathered evidence such as changing heat waves or objects distancing themselves from each other even further. We've established evidence that everything must be coming from one certain point, which people have described as the Big Bang. Apart from that, we do not know what caused that. But what we do see is that there is a lot of randomness and a lot of chaos in the world. Things do not seem to be happening for a reason. The world does not seem to be intelligently designed. It seems that rather vastly it is chaotic, and there is some order to it in which we find ourselves, for example. And there are a lot of reasons why I would reject the belief in God, because I think that the belief in God is merely a speculation that is not properly built on concrete evidence, but merely on assumptions that there must be an origin to this, as it seems, and that origin must be God. Fine, you can accept that, but that doesn't seem reasonable to me. But my main point would actually be the problem of hell, to be very honest.
Okay, so let me just focus on one thing that you said here about chaos. Imagine if you had a person who had no arm and he prayed to God and he said, "Give me an arm," and then suddenly he sees this arm floating down and it reattaches himself. What would you say about that?
I would think that there's probably something very freaky going on, and that we may reconsider the supernatural. This is actually an example that I myself gave before as something that may make me reconsider religion and the supernatural again.
Yeah, I actually think I watched that video. So I watched that video, and you actually said you would believe in God because of that. Now,
I may want to correct that.
You would have surety that God exists. Yeah, go on.
I think I said I would reconsider God, because it's very likely that there is something very strange going on that we cannot explain. That's what I think.
Okay. So in this situation, this example here, I think this is a really good example and illustrates certain points here. Why would you now reconsider? Why would you now consider that now there's some sort of divine agency in this situation?
Because with everything that we look at so far, and everything that we have found an explanation for, and that we do find explanation for, we have never ever concluded that the explanation for it is supernatural, or that the explanation for it is God. We have no single example, and for everything we have a reasonable explanation for everything that we see so far, and for others we nearly have reasonable explanations. If we suddenly see that, my example was actually the leg, and I call that the miracle of the descending leg. If we suddenly saw that somebody who clearly does not have a leg prays to God, or others pray to God, and we see a leg coming down from the sky and attaching itself to him, what I would think is that, okay, this is the first thing ever in human history that we clearly do not have any reasonable explanation to, and that I cannot explain in any reasonable way. So maybe there is something supernatural, and maybe there is a God.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is this, is that you see an event, you would try to exhaust all the materialistic explanations, and if you don't have a materialistic explanation, you would look for another explanation. Is that right?
I want to be careful with that because I'm sure that there are lots of things that I personally did not see the explanations to, but yeah, okay.
But you'd expect
that
an
actually sounds,
wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, that actually sounds reasonable. I would try to find a proper explanation to it, and if I could not find it, then I would leave it to further figure out what there is.
Yeah.
I know where you will go with
it. But you would
go
assume,
ahead.
but Ridwan, you would assume there is an explanation, though, wouldn't you? You wouldn't think that this is just magic, something happening without.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a reason. What you're basically doing is that you're seeing something which is a possibility. Yeah. In this scenario, it's either the missing leg or the missing arm. You're then seeing that this human being, you could possibly have a human being with a leg, and you could possibly have a human being without a leg. And therefore, if you see an event, which is what we'd call a possible event, you would look for an explanation behind it, why it exists in the way it does. Is that correct? Would you agree upon that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So maybe just to give another example of this, to maybe illustrate it further, if you've got a red triangle, yeah, and this goes back to maybe what Jake was saying earlier, a triangle is necessarily three sides. Yeah, by necessity, it has to have three sides. So in modal logic, we would say a triangle always has three sides, or in all possible worlds, a triangle will have three sides, yeah, on a flat surface. Yeah. So we'd say that. But it's not necessary for it to be red. So in this situation, the redness of the triangle is a possibility. Yeah. It's not defined or explained by the existence of a triangle. Because it's not explained by the existence of a triangle, then we need an explanation outside of the triangle to explain why it's red opposed to blue, to green, to yellow. Yeah. Does that make sense? So the redness is what we call, the redness is what we call a contingent property. Yeah. And the three sides is what we call a necessary property. I'm talking about on a mathematical abstract knowledge idea of triangles. Yeah. So it is necessary. And so therefore, whenever we identify something that's contingent, i.e. something that's possible, then we ask for an explanation of why it is the way it is. That's firstly. And the second thing is we seek an explanation outside of its own contingent reality. Yeah. So the red triangle, we're asking what outside of the triangle caused it to be red, other than a triangle. Yeah. So this now leads us to the point, which is that all of reality that we sense, that we currently sense, these are possible realities or contingent things. Yeah. And so these contingent realities, therefore, have to have an explanation outside of itself. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now you've got two. So go on, Karen.
No, go on.
Yeah. So I was going to say you've got two ways now to identify that contingent realities require a necessary being. Yeah. The first way is to say that the total sum of contingent realities, no matter, even if we have an infinite number of contingent realities, they still require an explanation outside of themselves. Like if you had an infinite number of red triangles, you'll still need to have an explanation why all those triangles are red. And that would be outside of the triangle. The second argument would be that contingent realities or contingent beings dependent upon other contingent beings cannot have an actual infinite or an infinite regress. Yeah. So you need to have a termination point. So both those arguments lead to a necessary being, meaning the only explanation that's left open to us when we observe contingent realities is that a necessary being exists.
Yeah. The issue is we're talking about the opposite of necessary being an infinite regress. We're talking about the necessary being God. As said at the very beginning, my whole point was, even if we got to this end and to this resolution, what exactly would it do to the argument? What exactly would it do to the conversation? We could still not conclude that it must be one God or an almighty God or the specific God.
Yeah. So Ridwan, we're saying here that there is God is a necessary being with a will. So we're saying there is one necessary being with a will. So we want to establish whether a necessary being exists first. Then we're going to establish whether this necessary being has to have a will. And then we can establish whether the necessary being with a will is singular, or can you have a multiplicity of it. So all we're doing now is this first stage of the argument is just simply establishing whether a necessary being exists. And I'm saying contingent realities require an explanation outside of itself. Now, that explanation is either going to be another contingent thing or a necessary thing. If it's another contingent thing, you still need to have an explanation for that. So it doesn't answer the problem. So all contingent realities or contingent beings need to have a necessary foundation to determine its existence or ground its existence or cause its existence. Yeah. So you agree upon that now, and this is basically what Jake was arguing in a different way.
The issue is
modal logic argument.
The issue is we're going into a world of thoughts and discussions that are completely clouded and dark, that don't actually lead us anywhere. What we have is our little knowledge that we have, you and I, each one of us here. We know about maybe less than 0.1% of what is in the universe. We understand even less than that. We can speculate endlessly about how far back everything goes, how far back from the beginning of this universe everything goes. If this universe even does have a beginning, we don't even know that question, the answer to that question. People often assume that we know the answer. We don't. We don't have an answer to the question whether this universe has or does not have a beginning. Then we can go on into how long this goes back and what exactly is outside of this. We can make endless speculations about this. We will not get anywhere with that. I simply cannot see how this can possibly answer the question of one God.
So Ridwan, the issue is that we've got basically two possibilities. We got a proposition could be one of three things. It could either be impossible, which Jake has mentioned before. It could be possible, which is a contingent being, or it could be necessary. Yeah. So basically, we've got one of these three things. So even if I've only sensed 0.0001% of the universe, then for me to turn around and say, well, there must be something outside the universe that might be something else. Well, it's going to be in one of those three categories. It's either going to be impossible, which obviously means it doesn't exist. It's either contingent, or it's going to be necessary, meaning it cannot not exist. Yeah. So it cannot not exist. It must always exist. Yeah. So it's going to be one of these three categories. If it's a contingent reality, contingent thing, then by definition, by the nature of science, by the nature of rational thinking, by the nature of the fact that that leg was descending down from the heavens, we're going to ask the question, what's the reason behind it? Because it's a contingent thing that we've identified. Yeah. So all we have to, so even if I say, okay, there's 99.99% of some universe I haven't seen. Yeah. Okay, fine. But if it's contingent, it requires an explanation.
Okay, let's do this. You obviously, as we know, all of you, come by this path to the conclusion that there is one necessary being, that there is one originator that is apart from or above everything, and has a will. And then when we get here, how exactly do we conclude that this specific being is the one God who communicates with us and who asks us to do specific things, and who will put us through a judgment, through a review, and give us rewards and punishments? How exactly would we get there? This being could be anything. It could be a being that is not necessarily conscious. It could be a being that is not necessarily involved in micromanaging us. That doesn't.
But it has to be a necessary being. But it has to be a necessary being.
Possibly. But how exactly do we get to all of these? I don't have an opinion on this.
Being.
Okay, I don't have an opinion on that part.
Sorry?
I don't have an opinion on that part. How exactly? But you have the conviction that this is.
Yeah.
Let me jump in for a second, guys. So Ridwan, first of all, I want to give you the chance to talk, because I don't want to make it seem like you don't feel like you're getting ganged up on. Hopefully, I just don't think we're getting anywhere, to be honest. So I just want us to have a good discussion with you. So you need to be able to speak and make your case for the non-existence of God, or for atheism as well. I wanted to touch on what you said about the whole skepticism thing, that we know 1% of the universe. We don't know whether this is true. It's all speculative. But we can either go there and talk about that, or I can just give you the chance to talk first, and we can get back to that later. Maybe you want to say something about why you don't believe. Maybe you want to make a positive case or ask us questions. So I want to give you the chance to do that. Yeah,
sure. I would love to. I'm burning inside to go to the problem of hell with you guys, because I think I think it is a crucial question that matters to the religion of Islam and the God of Islam specifically. Because is it okay? Is that fine?
It's okay. It's okay. We can. So this whole epistemological concern and what the stage 2 cosmological arguments about God's will. We can come back to that. Let's just see what you have to say about the problem of hell.
Okay, so one of the major reason, and still one of the major reasons why I do not believe in the one God, specifically the God of Islam, is the problem of hell. And I think it is a question that people generally cannot give an answer to, or they cannot give a satisfactory answer to, which is why they want to move on to different arguments instead, and overlook this one gap and move to something that shines instead. I simply think that the idea of hell, the idea of creation, free will, afterlife, and hell is completely incoherent and inconsistent with our understanding of morality, and even with Islam's own understanding of morality, for example, or with God's understanding of morality, if you want to have it so. So the idea is that that there was one God at the very beginning before he created anything. Then he did create a world, a universe, and beings within this universe. Then he did give certain beings or certain creatures within this universe free will, and he gave them the choice to believe in him or to disbelieve in him after he communicated his message to them. And depending on whether they believe or do not believe, they will go to heaven or hell. Yet Allah, or God, at the very beginning is almighty, all-knowing, and he's the greatest good. And yet at the very beginning, knowing exactly what we will do with our free will, knowing exactly how we will be, knowing exactly where we will end after he creates us, he still created millions, billions of humans that are bound to go to hell. The whole implication, the whole idea that free will exists, that he creates free beings, that he judges them and sends some to hell, necessarily concludes that numerous humans will necessarily go to hell. It is inevitable. It is part of the whole plan. And this, I think, is incoherent. It insults the intelligence of this specific God that we are supposed to believe in. It insults his morals. It is inconsistent with our universal understanding of different morals. It is inconsistent with Islamic morality. I think that this makes the belief in God for me and for many other people impossible, especially in the Islamic God.
Okay, so before I comment on that, I want to say that what you said in the beginning there about, this is the reason why we jump to other arguments, right? I don't think that's very charitable, right?
Sorry, that's not what I meant. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because Jake mentioned Graham Oppy, right? And Graham Oppy is one of the most popular atheist philosophers these days. And even his take on the problem of evil, first of all, he says he doesn't think that the logical problem of evil doesn't work. Of course, that's not an argument from authority. I'm just saying that's his position. But he's saying even if it does, for a theist, or generally for anybody with any position in life, like if you're a materialist, for example, and you don't have an answer to the hard problem of consciousness, but you think you have very, very strong reason to be a materialist and you weigh it out, there's always going to be this hierarchical order to your epistemic considerations. You're going to prioritize certain considerations over others. So a theist who doesn't think that there's a solution to the problem of evil, which is not me, by the way, I'm not trying to avoid the question, I'm just saying, generally speaking, can say, well, I don't know. You can appeal to skeptical theism, just like in any other position. Like as a materialist, you could say you don't know how to solve the whole problem of consciousness and remain a materialist, provided it's not a defeater for materialism, which honestly I think it is. But so coming to the problem of hell, right? So this is a question to do with morality. Now, I want to know what argument you're making, just to be clear on it. Are you saying that God punishes people in hell, therefore a good God does not exist? It's a logical argument. Or are you saying I don't like it, so I don't want to believe in this God?
No. To clarify first off, I would not argue that you guys stick to other arguments because you don't like to answer this question. That was not my point. What I'm saying is this is often overlooked or skipped because it doesn't have a proper answer. Also, with you guys specifically, you are Muslims. You fundamentally believe in the hell question. To me, this problem is not a problem that consists of, or that is a problem to me because I think, oh, God will punish people, he will burn people, boo-hoo. No, that's not the point. The point is that the idea itself is incoherent and inconsistent with the morals that this God himself preaches. It doesn't make sense. It implies that numerous billions of people will senselessly burn in hell for eternity simply because they were created and simply because they did not believe.
Yeah, so you're saying that's bad, that's evil, right?
No, I'm saying it's inconsistent and incoherent. I do definitely also say that it is inhuman to maybe all of us, but yeah, it is. I think it is vastly incoherent.
So you mean there's an internal incoherence within Islam because, or whatever theistic position you're addressing, because the God preaches something and then contradicts it?
Very much, yeah.
So can you lay that out for me? What
sure,
is it like? Premise, conclusion. God says this, and then he says that. Therefore, there's a contradiction. It's not true, or however you want to put it.
Sure, I actually made a presentation about that before.
You don't have to do it that formally. You can just explain to me.
I just wanted to show something. I just wanted to scribble something. But so God, the teaching is that God creates us in the very beginning. He creates us to worship him. He is almighty, all-knowing, and he is good. He's the most forgiving. For example, he has these qualities, the greatest, the most forgiving, and all that. He creates flawed human beings like us in masses of numbers. And he creates us knowing that we will have free will. And he creates many of us, including me, for example. Let me give an example of myself. I would like to sacrifice myself for this. He creates me knowing that in life, I will use my free will in such a way that I will end up not believing in him, that I will end up believing that he does not exist and that his religion is false. And that I will, therefore, because of my free will, because of this decision that I made, because of my ignorance and stupidity maybe, I will end up going to hell and burning there forever, especially also with all the other people that I led astray. But despite that, knowing from the very beginning that I will, if he gives me free will, that I will misuse my free will, that I will end up in ignorance and stupidity and rebellion, and that I will go to hell eternally. He created me nevertheless. He created me as this flawed being who is incapable to grasp this truth. And he punishes me for what he himself created while calling himself the most forgiving and the most good. And he contradicts with himself on so many levels.
I mean, I don't agree with everything you said there, if that's your representation of Islam. But that aside, I just want to know, Ridvan, where is the contradiction?
The contradiction is Allah is not the most forgiving. I am more forgiving than Allah in this case.
Why?
Because I would forgive people for much bigger faults, for much bigger crimes, for much bigger ignorances, for worse things that they do.
So his forgiveness is not unconditional. He says that God does not forgive for people to associate partners with him, right? So there's a condition there, right? It's not unconditional. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, anything else he can forgive. So even if you want to say you're more forgiving, whether or not that's true, I just don't see, if you're trying to make a logical argument and say there is a contradiction, I don't see a contradiction.
That is fallacious, because that's like me saying, hey, I'm not a thief, but sometimes I like to steal food when I'm hungry, but I'm still not a thief.
No, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's saying God saying he is the most forgiving is contextualized within Islam, right? So forgiveness comes at certain conditions, right? Mm-hmm. And within that context, God is the most forgiving, because forgiving isn't all he is is also the most just. So there's justice. So in order for you, I just want you to lay out, to show me where is a direct contradiction. I'm not telling you, so you can think it's evil. That's up to you. It's your prerogative. But then I'm telling you, in order for you to say there's an inconsistency, because I was trying to get you to be clear on what argument you're making. You're not saying it's not just that you don't like it. You're saying the religion, what it states, is incoherent. It contradicts itself. But I don't see two premises that contradict each other. I don't see two propositions that contradict each other in what you've presented.
Okay, so you could arbitrarily say that forgiveness comes with conditions, and Allah made those conditions clear, which is why when he does not forgive you for not believing in him, that is not a contradiction, because he made the condition very clear. You could say that. Well,
it's not arbitrary. It's not arbitrary. I gave you the verse. I mean, there's a condition. It's there, so it's not arbitrary. He mentioned it. I'm not making an ad hoc, exception here. So I'm saying, so just to make it easier for you, Ridvan, because I think this is the harder case to make. You're trying to point out an inconsistency. Just to get to the crux of it, if you're saying there's an actual inconsistency, you need to present two propositions that are accepted within the Muslim position and represent them properly. Even if you don't represent them properly, at least I want two contradictory propositions that he says this and he contradicts himself here. If that's not there, then I think you're trying to make a different argument. Maybe you're trying to make an evidential argument from evil and you're not necessarily tying it into Islam. But this, to point out an inconsistency, I haven't necessarily seen that yet.
Well, go ahead, Yusuf. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. And apologies as well. My daughter's got a really bad cough, so I've had to keep running away and checking on her. But
it's okay, man.
All the best.
So, with regards to this concept of being the most forgiving, so the idea that you can give a particular example where you think you would forgive where Allah doesn't make you more forgiving, because we can think of this in terms of quantity. So, how many things can you forgive compared to how many things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive? So he's an eternal being, and there are countless beings being forgiven for countless acts. Now, if he can forgive them for that, he is objectively more forgiving than you. So he is the most forgiving by the necessity of his nature, him being an eternal being, him being the one that judges the entirety of humanity. And in terms of the quantity of things that he can forgive, there is nothing you can't, even in the amount of life that you have, whether you live to 100 or 150, there isn't enough time in your life for you to be able to forgive as much as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. So by necessity, you are not more forgiving than Allah, simply because you can point out one example where you do forgive something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't. Because again, here we're not saying Allah is all forgiving. He doesn't forgive all things. We've got conditions that are mentioned in the Quran that Abdul Rahman mentioned. And this concept of being the most forgiving simply is just referring to the fact that there is no being other than him that can forgive as many things as he does. And, we've got enough sort of examples where he's done that, where there's people that have done terrible things and they've turned to him sincerely, wanting to improve themselves and become better people, and he has forgiven them for that. And this happens, so I just give you an opportunity.
Did I understand that correctly? Are you saying that the fact that Allah is eternal and there are endless things that he can forgive and endless occasions on which he can forgive,
the highest quantity, not necessarily
implies
endless.
So the high quantity of forgiveness that Allah can give means that he is necessarily more forgiving than me, because I cannot forgive as many things that Allah can forgive.
Yeah, that's what most forgiving is. Being the most forgiving means that you forgive.
Ridvan. So what Yusuf is saying here, I mean, just even if you can disagree with that, and I'm trying to help you really. So you can disagree with that, but then you have to accept that if that is the understanding of most forgiving as presented in Islam, which is a possible explanation, then there's no direct inconsistency. So I want you to tell me, are you really making an argument that it's inconsistent? So for example, if God said he is not the most forgiving,
okay,
and
can I ask everyone a question?
Yeah.
How do you guys define most forgiving? How do you define most forgiving?
Yusuf just gave a perfectly reasonable answer.
Is most forgiving does most forgiving to you just mean somebody who forgives in the most cases, or who has the highest quantity of forgiveness?
It's not unconditional. So the problem is here, Ridvan, is that you are looking at one attribute of God, right? So he is the most forgiven, but that's contextualized because he's also just, right? He has wrath. He punishes, right? So you can have multiple attributes that maybe on the face of it sound contradictory, but once you contextualize it and be a bit charitable towards the text and what it means, there is a coherent picture. So
okay, let me ask you a question, Abdul. If I say to you, I am the most merciful, the most forgiving guy out there, but if you call me names, then I will come and shoot you.
Yeah, it depends.
It's clear, but I'm also the most forgiving, the most merciful, the most kind, and the most just person out here.
No. I wouldn't think you're based on this contextualized human experience we have. No, I do not think, because I know what we mean.
How does that make to the question? How does that change the?
Because okay, so right now you are saying that God, being the most forgiving, should rule out the possibility of him justly, according to the Islamic position, punish people in hell. That's not a contradiction. It might be something that you don't like, and I think it's not, right? So, but it is.
Contradiction is A and not A.
Okay,
exactly.
I said it is incoherent and contradictory on many levels. It is incoherent because, for example, as explained before, God is supposedly creating humans and putting them through a test, and then judging them based on the results of this test, and punishing them, burning them forever, or even rewarding them forever. I think even the reward part is incoherent and unjust, if you want to have it so. It is incoherent because Allah or God is not really judging people for something that they have done wrong, and which could have not been prevented by himself, or which they are really powerful enough to prevent. He punishes them for something that he himself in the very beginning caused.
Yeah, but it seems to me, Ridvan, sorry, because right now, in order for you to make a logical argument, you can't sneak in your. I'm not saying sneak in a bad way, but you can't sneak in your views on metaethics, whatever your views on morality are, and what morality is, and what it means to be good and bad. You can't sneak that in without us addressing it. So right now, if you're making an argument purely based on a logical incoherence, you're making a deductive argument, you have to say that being the most forgiving necessitates that God does not punish people in hell. God punishes people in hell, therefore God is not the most forgiving. You have to make that, but we will dispute premise one very clearly, right?
Well, I think
are you not allowing us to dispute premise one?
No, you can't do that. I just think, I mean, even on that point, I think you have a big misrepresentation of what most forgiving would mean, or how it would be defined. Let's not even come to the fact that Allah is eternal, almighty. His lifetime exceeds my lifetime by a mathematically impossible number, which is why my forgiveness is incomparable to his forgiveness necessarily.
But you're a subjectivist, aren't you? Aren't you a subjectivist, Ridvan? So
it doesn't matter. I'm not saying it's morally wrong. It doesn't matter. I'm saying it is incoherent.
But isn't what most forgiving for you, because forgiving is a moral judgment, someone being forgiving, that's a moral judgment. Isn't what is most forgiving to you a subjective view that's not necessarily representative of an objective reality and the way things ought to be?
I'm not really a subjectivist in that sense. I don't think that morals are true or false in any sense, that they are simply representations of our emotions about certain things for which we make rules based on a need to survive. I don't think that they are subjectively or objectively true or false. But aside from that, forgiveness.
So you're an emotivist, but Ridvan, let's just take this step by step, so we can. This is me taking your argument seriously, by the way. I don't want to just brush it aside. I'm saying that I want you to make the argument. I can present what I think is a very good argument from evil and say, no, I think this is a better argument. I want to take your ideas seriously the way you present them. So what I'm seeing here is that you're an emotivist in the sense that you think that all moral propositions are reducible to emotional stances or emotional positions, and in that sense, it's inconsistent for you to say that there couldn't be an opposing emotional position on what it means to be the most forgiving or the most good. Because that would be an incoherence in your position. So I don't know. But
you can't judge us by my worldview, or what you think my worldview would be, or what you think what my morals would be. You would have to judge us by mine. No, not by yours at all. But for example, by what Islam, for example, would present, what we generally understand to be forgiveness to be, when we look at Islam, for example, does Islam teach you that you should simply violate? And I mean, I don't want to make any assertions here about Muslim society.
I don't care. You can bring that all in, but I just, as long as you're clear about what you want to say, because Ridwan, as long as you're clear.
Let me say this.
Yeah,
I don't think it's reasonable to say that forgiveness, or how most forgiving is defined, depends on the quantity of or on the numbers of which of how often you can forgive. Somebody who forgives everyone who steps on his feet is not more forgiving.
How can you say that as an emotivist? You don't think it's coherent? So your position is moral propositions are reduced to subjective emotions, and at the same time, I can't make a subjective emotional judgment about what it is for a moral proposition to be?
No,
that's incoherent.
No,
I can make a subjective moral judgment.
It's not based on Islam's own understanding. Even let's forget about Islam. Let's look at a normal, regular society. What we understand from forgiveness is a concept that we humans have established because we establish certain rules based on what hurts us, harms us, or what benefits us and pleases us, and we therefore teach to each other, hey, look, most forgiving is a concept that we have deliberately established, by which we mean somebody who forgives is somebody who looks past the mistakes that others have made and tries to, reconcile the bad with the good, and tries to make peace and tries to be merciful with that person. Somebody who, despite being abused and being, tricked and all that in a bad way, somebody who looks past it and says, hey, you know what? Despite everything you have done, I forgive you. That person would be, in a regular society, be considered the most forgiving person, for example. If we now look at God, on the other hand, God, or Allah in this case, is a being, an eternal being, who creates people and punishes them for not believing in him, simply for not believing in him, for nothing else. Despite the fact that despite the fact that in the very beginning he created them in such a way that they would not believe in him. That is not most forgiving by any definition.
There's one thing you need to understand. Ridwan, there's one thing you need to understand. The general position within the Islamic theology on this issue is that no people are punished unless a messenger has been sent to them. So people are not just simply punished because they didn't believe. So let's just be very careful.
It's called
mukallaf. We have to be very careful. Mukallaf, the one who's responsible. So we just got to be really careful in terms of that. The point that I think Abdul is saying is a few points. Firstly, is if you're saying that the standards that the Quran places on this is a logical contradiction, is impossible to reconcile, then therefore that discounts Islam. That means that you have a burden of proof to demonstrate that the only possible way to read a particular verse that talks about forgiveness or whatever it is that you're trying to point out is one particular way which contradicts another particular way. For example, if Jake here, he engages a lot with Christians, and he talks about Trinitarianism and the logical problem of the Trinity, and he will go to the very works of Trinitarians, the very scholars of the work, to demonstrate whether there is a logical coherence within their doctrine, while at the same time trying to uphold the idea of monotheism. So you've got to do the same thing if you're trying to justify that. If you can't justify it and it just simply saying, well, I just don't like it, it's just not,
I never
not for
said
me.
That. I never said that.
Then, or I have my own definition of what I think mercy is and forgiveness is.
Let me ask you a question.
You didn't say that. To be clear, you didn't say that. He's just basically giving you that's a caricature of emotism, basically. But go on.
I want to say, let's not make a mistake in defining who goes to hell in Islam according to the Islamic belief. Somebody who knows about the faith and who rejects it and doesn't believe in it goes to hell according to the Islamic belief. So by the opinion of, I think, everybody who sits here and the Muslim population in general and Islamic scholars in general will definitely go to hell by the scriptural evidence.
If you die in the state you're in. So we can't say that. There's a lot of examples where people were the biggest enemies of Islam, and they took Shahada later on, and you wouldn't even have expected it. So we can't even say that about you now. We can say that under certain conditions, if you were to die in that state, then you would be guaranteed hellfire. But
Granted,
Allah,
yes.
so he says, and this is,
and to be honest, it's not even. Yeah, it's not even our place to make that judgment anyway, Ridwan.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Not know.
Of course it is. You have to go through.
Guys, let's let Ridwan.
No, just really quickly, just want to finish this particular point. As you may or may not know, the judgment of who goes to hell is with God alone. Yeah, we might turn around and say this person's a disbeliever, this person's a Muslim from a dunya perspective, but actually the key judgment is for God alone. I think my problem with this argument, Ridwan, is that it seems really. It doesn't seem very convincing.
Can I get back to it? Can I get back to it?
Yeah.
Can I get back to it, please? I'm completely aware that the Islamic position is that somebody who that the judgment is up to Allah, which is why you can't make judgments. I learned the same thing when I was a Muslim. I want to ask a series of questions. Who is up for that? Abdul, do you want to go? Or
yeah, but,
I would like to ask brief questions.
Just for us to be clear, just like we wrapped up the first part of the discussion, let's wrap this one up because
I don't want to. The main point, right? I want to just go with very quick answers, very quick questions.
Is it related to this same argument?
This argument.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So you believe, or the idea is that Allah is all-knowing, almighty, and the most merciful and the greatest good, right?
Yes.
Yes. And you believe that Allah created all of us.
Yes.
You believe that Allah gave us free will?
Yes.
And you believe that Allah gave us the mission. You believe that Allah knew exactly what we would do with our free will, right?
Knew. Did you say knew?
That he knew exactly what we would do with our free will.
Yes.
And despite that, he created us at the very beginning, right?
Yes.
And even before he created us, he knew exactly, if he created us, what we would do with our free will.
Freely,
okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then he set up a hell and a heaven, which he built, and gave us the mission to believe in him, to find him. And if we reject his belief, then it is our fault, right?
Yes.
And that we, disbelievers, will therefore go to hell, right?
Yeah. Do you agree that it's free? Because you asked me, because one of the questions you asked me is that God gave us free will.
Yes,
so
yes,
are you granting that it's by free choice that you are seeing the truth? Just grant the Islamic perspective. If you're doing an internal critique, by your free choice, you are seeing the truth and arrogantly rejecting it. So basically, you are doing that on your own account.
Okay, but the condition here is not that I clearly know that Allah is real and that Islam is true, and then I reject Islam and therefore go to hell. That's not the point, right? The point we're making is that I'm aware of the Islamic religion, of the Islamic text, but I reject it.
No. So you're gonna have to demonstrate. You're gonna have to represent the Islamic position correctly. So you're gonna have to accept, for the sake of argument, right, that the Islamic position is that the kufr is when you see the truth and reject it and cover it. That's literally what kufr means.
Yes.
So that's why. So for example, there's one of the major sins in Islam is called ta'alli, right? And that's basically to make a judgment on a person, and an ultimate judgment on a person as a human being. So for example, if you die right now, Ridwan, I can't say Ridwan is in hell, right? Because every person is judged based on the numerous uncountable factors that we don't see that's involved in every single person's life, and God says that he brings even an atom's weight into account. We only judge by what we see. So if I refer to somebody as a kafir, that is just a superficial judgment. I'm judging by what is the apparent. So you have to grant the Islamic position properly, that those who will remain in hell are those who explicitly reject the truth upon seeing it, and those are the people who, if they were returned to this life even after seeing hell, they would still reject the truth, knowing that it's the truth.
I do not think that the scripture backs this up. Number one, I don't believe that the vast majority of Muslims and scholars believe in this.
No, this is not controversial. Sorry, carry on.
I agree that this is not controversial. Okay, but I say that the vast majority of Muslim scholars don't believe in this. We have very clear texts on this from the last 1,400 years.
What don't they believe? Sorry, what do the vast majority of scholars?
The idea is not that only. Okay, let me explain. The idea is not that only if I very, very clearly know that Allah is real, that Islam is true, that what Islam expects from me is true, that all of this is most definitely real, and then I still knowingly reject it, that I will then go to hell.
Yeah, Ridwan, I'm not saying you know it now. So I'm not saying you're going to have this consistent conscious awareness that God is right there and you're just going to continuously reject him. I'm saying that at a certain point, the kafir would knowingly reject the truth. How that mechanistically, how that actually happens psychologically, that's not something I'm aware of.
Do we agree that when I'm dying, that at the point of death, I reject Allah? Because I don't believe in Allah. Do you agree that, for the sake of the argument, somebody who goes to hell is somebody, or if I, at the moment of death, reject Allah and do not believe in his existence, do not believe in Islam, I will, by definition, by the Islamic teachings, go to hell?
Yeah, but not by my judgment of the apparent that this guy doesn't believe. Yeah,
doesn't matter.
By God's judgment and knowledge of the ultimate truth that the person who is rejecting is knowingly rejecting the truth out of arrogance. That by that judgment. So I can't say that a random non-believer who died, and even if the last thing he said was, I don't believe in Allah, I can't say that that person is in hell.
Okay.
Because even if that person might, and it's not just that person must have been exposed to Islam, it's that person must have been exposed to the proper form, an unadulterated version of Islam, seen the truth and arrogantly rejected it. So this is not a controversial position in Islam.
Okay, but it's not about what you believe or what you see. It's about what Allah,
ultimately is the case. Yes.
What Allah teaches and what ultimately is the case. So if I die as a disbeliever, if I die as a disbeliever, or if I myself, with the position that I right now have, die, then I will, by the Islamic teachings, the fundamental Islamic teachings, go to hell. That is the idea.
Yes, if you die as a disbeliever and you are truly a disbeliever in the eyes of God, then yes, you will go to hell. There's
and before Allah created me and put me on this earth, long before He created the world, He knew exactly that if He gives me free will and creates this person that I am today, I will eventually use my free will in such a way that I will not be convinced by him, and I will arrogantly disbelieve in him, which is why I will be eternally punished. And that just like me, millions, maybe billions of other people will also go to hell, despite him having given them this free will.
Yes, but
that is incoherent. I think that is.
It's not incoherent. Maybe you don't like it. So Ridwan, here's the situation.
Now you said it. Now you said you don't like it.
I see the power in the argument. So I freely admit that the argument from evil, whatever the problem of evil in some of its forms, is the most challenging position to theism, right? But I want to deal with your version, right? So I'm honestly telling you that I can present a much more compelling version than the one you're presenting right now, because the questions I'm asking you, I want to be clear on the argument you're making. Are you saying there is an incoherence, therefore it is false, or are you saying it is immoral, therefore it's false? If you're saying it is immoral, therefore it's false, you have to appeal to some kind of moral realism, some objective standard to say that if it does not match up with this standard, it is false. If you're saying there is an inconsistency within the Islamic tradition, present the contradiction. I haven't seen it yet, Ridwan. So what I'm saying is that argument that he knew I'll choose it freely, yet he put me in hell. I'm waiting for another premise. I'm waiting for, and this is evil, and you justify that. No. So you just don't like it.
Is that incoherent?
I'm saying it is incoherent because God Himself creates people that He puts into hell for the way that He Himself created them, and calls this a test, which is not a test. It is simply something that He Himself designed.
You granted it's free. You granted they are free.
I grant that it's free, but even if we wanted to go into the details of what free actually means, we could go into. We have newly emerging ideas of how much people actually have free will, because we are very much neurologically, environmentally, and so on conditioned on how we act in life, which will also decide.
But you grant for the argument, for the sake of the argument, that they are truly free. If you want to get into a discussion,
I don't think they're truly free.
No. For the sake of the argument, unless you want to get into a debate about free will, I'm saying for the sake of the internal critique you're doing on Islam, in the Islamic positions, these creatures are truly free.
Well, I don't think we could actually get anywhere with that, because we would have to consider the reality of how humans actually function, where we see that humans are not free.
But that's not an internal critique anymore. That's not. So right now we're going to get into a discussion about what free will is, and you're not doing an internal critique on what the Islamic position says and pointing out two contradictory propositions. I'm still not seeing two propositions that are contradictory, and honestly, I'm telling you, the problem of evil should be dealt with. It is a challenging argument, and there are good. Sorry, no, I'm here, and there are good responses to it. There are good counter responses. I'm just dealing with the idea you're proposing right now, and I'm questioning what your definition of good and evil is, and how that's going to affect your premises, and whether or not you can actually bring the Islamic position to an incoherence. Incoherence meaning there are two propositions that are contradictory, which I haven't seen yet. So.
Okay.
Maybe you can
I think Yusuf wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I think Yusuf wanted to say something.
Yeah. So within the Islamic narrative, it's explicitly stated numerous times that the human is created responsible, and Allah even says in the Quran, "It's not me who wrongs you, but you wrong yourselves." So, like, you can't point to the Quran and say that this is incoherent when the Quran's message is quite clear, that the beings being created are making choices of their own accord, and that they are responsible for these choices and then punished for them.
And
whether he created them.
And
it doesn't really matter what the Quran says.
I think even
when it's not true.
It does. That's the whole point of it. The claim is that it's inconsistent, and we're showing you the elements that show that this isn't inconsistent. And you're just saying what it says isn't relevant at that point. When it is, it's incredibly relevant to the whole claim that you're making that it's inconsistent.
Just because the Quran says it is your responsibility, this is why I'm punishing you, that doesn't mean that logically seen it is actually their fault, which is why it's punishing them. It doesn't mean that the assertion that the Quran makes is necessarily correct. It just means that the Quran is making a certain assertion. I could make assertions here about how everything that I have ever said is true because I know that it is true, and you just need to trust me in that. That doesn't mean that you have to trust me in that.
But this isn't about a level of trust. This is about, you're saying the Quran is making a contradictory claim. And a contradiction is that it makes the claim A and not A simultaneously, the negation of A. Now, it hasn't made the negation of A. That is, it's pushing forward the claim that you are a responsible being and you're punished for the choices you make. That's not a contradiction. It's quite clearly not.
Yusuf, I think Ridwan had already, in his scenario, said he created human beings with free will.
Yeah,
so he's already acknowledged that. Now, the point that Abdul's trying to say... So the point Abdul's trying to... So if he's now going to say, well, I'm going to go back and say it's not really free, it's compelled, and God compelled them to become inmates of hellfire, that's something else now. But that's not what he originally said. And what Abdul's trying to say is this. He's trying to say, look, if you're going to say that it is impossible... belief in Islam is impossible. It's logically incoherent. A logical incoherence means that there's an internal critique. In this context, there's an internal critique that it says X and it says not X at the same time. Yeah, that's what Abdul's asking you to do, whether it's to do with the idea of forgiveness or whether it's to do with the idea of justice or anything like that. Now, what you're doing is you're saying, well, it just doesn't seem right in my mind. Yeah, that's how it comes across to me.
You're usually misrepresenting what I say with those little
go ahead.
emotional representations of me. But so how would you define the greatest good? I mean, you would consider God to be the greatest possible good there is, the most just, the most merciful. Here is a question that is within this whole argument of the problem of hell. When God creates us and when God creates this major plan, or when Allah creates this major plan, he creates as a part of this human beings. And with those human beings, he creates a hell. He creates the possibility of sin. He creates the place of punishment. He creates the supposed free will with which Allah will punish all those who he creates who will not pass the test. So we agree from the beginning, due to these conditions, that Allah necessarily creates a world, a reality in which millions or billions of people will burn in hell forever because they came into existence.
We don't know the number. There's no.
Forget about the number. Okay. Let's not be stuck with the numbers. But we agree that there will probably be masses of, or we agree that there will be people, humans, that will burn in hell forever because Allah created them from the very beginning. He created this.
So the idea of burning in hell forever, first of all, like there is a minority Muslim position where of annihilationism, where people won't burn eternally for hell. Ibn Taymiyyah spoke about this, so I'm not saying this is a majority position. It's definitely a minority position, but it's definitely a way out for somebody who doesn't see any solution to the problem if they wanted to take it. I mean, better than kufr, clearly, from a Muslim perspective. But then you're saying that the idea of God creating hell and, from a Muslim perspective, justly punishing people in that hell is incoherent. I think what you want to say is that it's unjust. But what I want to see is an argument for that, why it's unjust. I can see that it doesn't look nice. Like, nobody wants people to suffer. I don't want anybody to suffer. I don't want you to suffer, right? So the thing is, I can see that there is that emotional appeal, and we can have that discussion if that's the discussion you want to have, but it doesn't seem like it's the discussion you want to have. You want to move away from the emotion. You want to move away from an evidentialist case for the non-existence of God based on evil. You want to stick to a logical incoherence argument. You want to make an internal critique. So I'm respecting your choice to do that, but I'm asking you to make a stronger case for it. So if you want to say it's unjust,
I think I already explained how it is incoherent, because in this scenario, Allah is basically punishing people while claiming that he's punishing people for their own faults, for not believing in him. He's actually punishing them for the way he created them, knowing exactly that this is what their nature in which he created them, what they would do, what would happen to them eventually. But let me ask you.
And that's unjust?
Yeah, because that
is incoherent. I think that is completely
no, because you're packaging it as if it's a logical contradiction, but it's sounding
I'm saying it is incoherent. Look, it is incoherent.
Yeah, I'm saying that you said that, but the meat and potatoes of it is that it sounds more like a moral claim. It sounds more like you're saying that this.
It is not. It is not.
Then you need to show. Then you need to show what's the logical contradiction. You haven't shown that. There needs to be. You need to give premise 1, which is A. So the Quran or the Sunnah says A, and then premise 2, it also says B, and B is the negation of A. So B is not A.
It's a very rigid way to approach this.
That's what a contradiction is. So you need to.
What a contradiction is.
Yusuf, what I'm telling you is, it is incoherent that Allah creates human beings.
Yep.
That he says that they are fully responsible for their actions, although he creates them with their capabilities and with their nature. And then he decides to punish them because they do not believe in him, because they chose their free will, which he gave to them in the very beginning. He gave them free will, and they used this free will in the wrong way, which is why he will punish them forever. And this was their own fault.
Yes.
And they committed
evil. That's not
evil.
A contradiction.
That's
not a contradiction.
So guys, I just want to bring.
At the very beginning, was Allah able to? Allah calls this evil, and Allah is angry with this. Was Allah able to tweak that and to prevent that from the very beginning?
Ridwan,
can you please answer this question?
Sorry, because I answered that question like 3 times.
You did not. Was Allah able to tweak that at the very beginning?
Okay. Let me make a stronger argument from you. God was able to prevent the punishment of people in hell. Yet he did not. Okay, so I'm explicitly stating what you want to ask me right now. God was able to prevent it by not creating, yet he chose to create a world where free creatures will be accountable for their free actions, and he judged them by that. have not seen a contradiction. If there is a contradiction, I think because deductive arguments are just clear, because it's just, it's like analytically true. It's just clear what the argument says, and the contradiction is derived from the language of the argument. So I haven't seen a contradiction, but I want to move back to that point I told you about before you started with the argument from evil, about the skepticism, talk about the will, and then maybe some of the brothers can come in.
I think we have refused to acknowledge the point here, and have just have gone with cop-outs, actually, with this whole evil issue.
Can you point out the cop-out?
The cop-out is that you want to say that this is a moral argument, that I have to present a moral realism argument. Even if I now equipped a position of moral realism, you would then try to contest what I base my moral realism on, which is why you would inevitably never, ever accept my moral position as coherent and able to critique your position of God. Secondly, even if we give the example of how we as humans define forgiveness and what we mean by forgiveness, and we then we then clearly see with the regular eye that Allah does not fit this criteria of the most forgiving, you then simply cop out and say, well, Allah has a different definition and different conditions of what the most forgiving is, which is why we cannot judge him by the standard. That is a cop-out. I'm sorry.
So Ridwan, it's okay. You can say it's a cop-out. That's fine. And I accept your... Oh, go ahead.
I want to get to this one thing. The third one is that you are not ready to see the incoherence in the idea that Allah, at the very beginning, creates human beings in such a way that they will be conditioned to misuse their free will, which Allah gave to them in such a way that they will be eternally punished. And yet, at the very beginning, He decides to go ahead with that, decides to create them, and decides to send them to hell.
Yeah, Ridwan. So I respect your right to believe that it's a cop-out, but for me a cop-out would be that you present a problem and I brush the problem aside and avoid it. What I did do is I took your idea very seriously, and I actually asked you questions to clarify the specific argument you're trying to make. You said you're trying to make an internal critique and point out an incoherence. I'm not sure you're aware what an incoherence is, but in order to do that, you need to present an actual deductive form argument, or even if you're not going to present it in a deductive form, you have to point out two positions that are inconsistent or contradictory. Like proposition A and proposition B imply A and not A. That's a contradiction, and that would be very clear because deductive arguments are very clear. I took the position seriously.
I already have.
Okay, so let's give Ridwan one last chance to present the two propositions.
No, I want to ask you one brief question to just
Ridwan, just before you ask me the brief question. So I'm going to ask you about the two propositions.
We will get to this forever. I want to ask one simple
question. Ridwan, bro, please just focus on the two propositions. Then we can move on to the next point. You can ask me a question, and then I want to talk about that epistemic point, and the brothers can wrap up. So tell me, what's the first proposition in your argument?
What's A, and then what's the negation of it that the Quran or the Islam is putting forward? So first of all, what's the first proposition?
First proposition is Allah gave humans. Allah will. That is. It starts with a combination of all these points, which is that Allah is Almighty and all-knowing, and the greatest good and the most forgiving. The issue is that you do not accept my whole point about forgiving because you want to reject that as arbitrary.
Ridwan, you said you presented it. Now you're not giving proposition.
Proposition A.
That is what I mean. Allah is the all-knowing, the most. Sorry, Allah is all-knowing, Allah is almighty, and Allah is the most forgiving. My original point at the beginning was the greatest good, but whatever, okay. I will go with most forgiving.
The second proposition?
The second proposition is that Allah creates us as beings, despite knowing that we will eventually burn in hell with the capabilities that He gave us, but eventually He burns us in hell for not acknowledging Him. Although He knew that is a major contradiction.
In your view, that's a contradiction.
I'll tell you what.
It's clearly a contradiction.
No. The negation of the first premise. It is very clearly a contradiction. No. The contradiction would have been, so your first premise was that Allah was all-knowing, the most merciful, and the most just. The next one would have to be explicitly that He's not these things.
Well, yes, of course, that is part of the problem. If you let me go there, Allah
Right.
is therefore Allah
He's not
can therefore not be those three things at the same time.
Okay.
One of those is Almighty, the other is All-Knowing, and the third one is
Justice.
be it just or good or most forgiving.
Right.
If
But
he is
guys,
all-knowing,
we need to move on.
if he is all-knowing and almighty, that he cannot be most
Yeah,
forgiving. If he is most forgiving, then he cannot be almighty. If he is forgiving and almighty, he cannot be all-knowing.
Yeah. So just to remind you, Ridvan, before we move on, that I took that seriously, right? So I told you, okay, so you're gonna have to define forgiveness in a way where that stuff happening in the second premise did not happen. And that's where we got to your understanding of morality and the idea that you couldn't define forgiveness in that way because you're an emotivist, you're a subjectivist about your views, and you don't think that you could provide a subjective standard through which you actually demonstrate this contradiction. So we've been through that path, and I've said that, okay, here are the two propositions. Let's see how we can derive a contradiction from them, and it didn't happen. But it's okay. I mean, we can talk about this some other time, maybe. So I just want to get back to that basic point about. Sure, go ahead, Yusuf.
So I'm just going to say, so like, for example, if we did hold the first two, so that Allah is all-knowing and he's the most merciful, the issue here is that you're saying that he's not just. But then that is this thing that we mentioned before, that it's a moral problem for you.
No, it's not.
It is. If you're saying that he's not just... No, it is. Because if you're saying that he can't be all of these, let's say we affirm that he's all-knowing and he's... And what was the other one? The all-knowing, most merciful, most just. Let's say we affirm that he's those two. You're saying that therefore he's not just, which is to say that he's evil.
That is why I said.
Then this whole thing.
That is why I said, even by the criteria of morality that Islam teaches to you Muslims, for example, or to humans in general, this would be incoherent and ridiculous. You as humans would never accept to treat other humans in such a way while describing yourselves as forgiving. But you give Allah the permission to call himself forgiving while he does that, because you have the excuse that the Quran already conditioned him in such a way that is how forgiving is described in Allah's context. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so Ridvan, let's just move on because we've reached an impasse here. It's okay. So I just wanted to move back to that point you made about the 1% and the skepticism and stuff like that. I just want to make a few quick comments. That first of all, in order to make a case that, because we know 1% of this particular field, we cannot know more than 1% about another, you're going to have to show us a correlation between two fields. So this idea of philosophical skepticism is something that epistemology is basically built on. So I don't know what it means when you say, well, we know very little in the context of someone trying to tell you, for example, that whatever happens has an explanation. I mean, so one doesn't negate the other. Yes. So we know very little about certain things, and some other things can be necessarily true, as in we know them, for example, a priori. And we've got Kant, synthetic a priori truth, for example, that we can know things universally, right? At the same time, in a different area, yes, we can know very little about the mechanisms of the universe. So I don't think it's fair to say that because we lack knowledge in one area, that basically justifies some kind of global skepticism, or not global skepticism, but some kind of radical skepticism where we can't make any arguments or inferences based on the logical truth that we know. Now, just to come to the will part, because you said that there's a necessary being and it could be anything, and I just think that you had a good discussion with Jake, you had a good discussion with Sharif, you agreed on several good points, and the crux of the matter is basically whether how far we're going to go in our reasoning and how close that reasoning is going to come to the one God we believe in. Clearly, but in order to do that, clearly we have to start from the ground up. So if we reach to the conclusion that a necessary being exists, as I think you've said that it's very possible, I would say the fact that you think it's possible based on Jake's argument and the modal form he presented it in wouldn't make it necessarily true. And this is something you can look up. It's not controversial. The S5 of modal logic allows us to make that inference that if something is necessarily true, it is if something is possible, if something necessary is possibly true, then it is necessarily true, and it exists in all possible worlds. And from there, you make the inference that it exists in the actual world. Now we'll move on to a stage 2 contingency argument, or stage 2 cosmological argument, where we'll talk about the properties of this being. And there are many paths you can take in identifying what the nature of this being is. And the justification we would provide for the fact that this being has a will or a consciousness or some kind of moral compass is are numerous. One of the ways I would like to do it, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, is related to what we call the problems of other minds, and how we as humans identify that other objects or beings or things within existence have minds. So the way we identify things have minds is a controversial topic. There's the problem of other minds in philosophy is well known, right? And the way I see it is that there's nothing about your physical features that necessitates a mind, right? Mm-hmm. You could very well be a walking, talking robot, and I wouldn't know about it because I don't have access to your first-person subjective experience, and vice versa. So I think that one of the main ways through which we can identify that something has a mind is through its behavior. And it seems that there's something indeterministic about the way things with minds behave. For example, if you roll a rock down the hill, it's very predictable. It's just going to keep rolling. But something that has a mind doesn't just merely react to its physical stimuli and behave deterministically. And on that basis, we have a very foundational understanding of what it is for something to be another mind. And whatever skepticism you can levy at the idea that the necessary foundation has a mind, I can do the same thing with regards to you, because I could just be just as skeptical about you having a mind. So if I take that Methodist approach and define things that have minds to be basically non-deterministic in the way they behave, they don't just get knocked around, then I think, in my view, almost by definition, the necessary foundation of reality that doesn't have anything underlying it in terms of causal influence, it doesn't have any causal influence external to it that makes it cause, otherwise we wouldn't have solved the problem and arrived at a necessary being or a first cause, that necessarily behaves non-deterministically because it isn't determined by external forces to behave. And many philosophers that are atheists actually accept this. And Graham Oppy, somebody we've mentioned a couple of times here, believes in an initial state of the universe that it non-deterministically, determines whatever actual worlds there are going to be. So I would look at something like that and look at the philosophy of indeterminacy and say that, well, epistemically speaking, there's really nothing different than this object I see that seems to behave in a non-deterministic way and not just react to the wind blowing it around or whatever physical surrounding it has. It seems to behave like that. And the foundational aspect of reality that we call the necessary being or first cause is exactly like that. Actually, we have more reason to assume that it behaves freely of its own will and without any external influence on it than I do to posit that you have a free will, because you mentioned that people talk about psychology and determinism now and they question our free will. That's at least in principle conceivable. It's doable because you have external influence. However, by definition, a necessary foundation of reality or a first cause couldn't possibly have something external to it to make it act. So if you are ever justified in inferring that anything has a mind, I think you are most justified in inferring that the necessary foundation or first cause necessarily has the most free of wills and minds. And I think that this is a very strong case that maybe you would have to counter. Not you specifically, someone who denies that would have to counter, because it is a plausible explanation. Otherwise, I think a naturalistic theory would lack basically explanatory depth. It's basically saying there's something indeterministic happening and we don't know what it is. That's just the way it is. It's a brute fact. Could be magic, but I think we have a further step that we can go. That's a very premature place to stop, and I'm providing a plausible explanation right now that actually backs up the idea that this foundation that doesn't have external influence to it necessarily has a will, and I'm more justified in believing that than believing that Ridvan, for example, has a will. So
Okay.
maybe
Can I respond to
sure.
the bulk of that? No, thank you so much, first of all, for that. What I want to say is I want to clarify that whole philosophical skepticism part, which is my point is not that we don't know anything, which is why it's not as simple as to just simply say we know so little, which is why all the assumptions that we make as well are necessarily false. What my position is, to be quite simple and quite clear, is that we know very little. We explore and experience. We find out certain things. We find explanations for things. Increasingly, we have experienced that the explanations that we seek for and that we find, contrary to the last to explanations that we found 2,000 years ago, which were wrong, we nowadays see that most of the explanations, or all of the explanations that we have ever found and come to with concrete evidence, are explanations that are outside of God. We have never ever concluded that something has a supernatural origin or something has God as its origin. And in the face of this, we know very little. We are now here in the 21st century. We have just discovered the universe and outer space and how everything seems to be aimlessly floating around. The best we can do is simply to go and to look at reason, look at evidence, look at proper conclusions, look at concrete evidence, and to find out what exactly is the cause of a certain result. It would be absurd, I think.
Sorry, Ridvan, can you explain?
You're free to.
Can you explain that bit? What you mean by we've? Sorry, just so I can understand what you mean by everything we found is every explanation we found turned out to be naturalistic.
Well, this is basically this basically goes back to what was known as the God of the gaps argument, which is old and doesn't do it justice. But people in the past, over the last 1,000 years, have come up with different explanations for why thunder exists or why fire exists. People attributed holy things to fire, for example, or why it suddenly starts raining, why earthquakes exist. And they often came up with explanations that attributed the origins and the causes of these things to the supernatural, that gods or a specific god is responsible for this. And those explanations were always false.
That's unfair, Ridvan, because you're telling me that we do in the scientific enterprise, we're going to explore it. Obviously, no believer thinks that once you look under a microscope, you're going to see angels holding particles up. I mean, so obviously under a scientific investigation, you're not going to look under a microscope and see God, and I don't think anyone believes that. So really, I think you're attacking a weak form of theism.
But we also do not have a single evidence of something that happens for a completely inexplicable reason that we have no proper scientific explanation for. Such things do not exist. They exist in hearsay, such as people suddenly, things moving around on their own and floating around and all these things, but we don't actually have any concrete evidence of that, and we have no single thing where we simply cannot explain what the hell is going on.
But you don't appeal to scientism, do you? Is science the only way?
I think this is where science is much more superior to philosophy in general.
You can think it's superior, but is it the only way?
No, it is not the only way. Okay. Of course, you can make speculations. The issue with this is, in history, we see that with everything that we have pursued, we always found a natural, reasonable explanation to it. You can now also assume that there is probably something greater than this, that there is probably a God out there, that this is probably all micromanaged, and that this God put us into this 14 billion year-long universe for some strange reason. But the issue is that would just be an assumption on your part. And you are free to make that assumption, but it would in fact just be an assumption. It would be a very grotesque inference. Let me finish the thought, please. It would be a very grotesque inference, and we never make such an inference in any other field, about any other thing. When it comes to scientific explanations, we never make such inferences. We always base them on reasonable evidence, like in the Big Bang, for example. God is the only place where we make such a huge inference for no reason.
Yeah, so Ridwan, we need to understand, and I think it goes back to what I originally talked about, which seems a long time ago now, which was the floating leg that attaches to the person. Yeah, and what did I say? And I gave the other example in regards to the color red, the red triangle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said that when you have a possible thing, possible being, yeah, or a contingent reality, you need an explanation outside of itself. That proposition, that point, yeah, is not a scientific point. That's a philosophical point. Yeah, that philosophical point or that axiom. Yeah, some people may use it as the principle of sufficient reason for contingent realities. That is necessary for science. Now, what science will do is it'll assume there are reasons and explanations and causes behind events that we observe, and it will look for it. And either that will be within another contingent reality, or it will stop at a necessary reality. Yeah. And this is the point. Now, if you're going to stop at a contingent reality, if you're going to stop at a contingent reality and just say, well, that's it, I'm not going to answer anymore, that is special pleading. Yeah?
I don't. Let me clarify that very briefly, okay? I would rather stick with saying, hey, this is as much as we know right now. We can speculate about the origin of all of this, about why we are in this huge universe, about where all of this comes from. The issue is everything that we will do will just simply be speculations with lots of inferences. I would rather, I'm not saying, hey, the God claim is absolutely false, creator is absolutely false, this is all there is. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is our knowledge is very limited. And when it comes to how the origin came into existence, I would rather stick to, well, we do not know. Maybe we should find out. Then saying, okay, God did it, or hey,
no. But I'm not saying God did it. Please, let's be really focused.
Okay, but I'm saying I rather choose
saying,
ignorance in that if I don't know it.
Yeah, no. But you can choose ignorance. But I'm saying that ignorance will either be ignorant of a contingent reality or ignorant of a necessary reality. Now, if it's ignorance of something called a contingent reality, then by definition, it's going to need an explanation. So itself is not the foundational explanation. Unless you're saying there is no foundational explanations at all, and they're just things that pop into existence without explanation.
Unreasonable to me, but yeah.
Like magic.
Yeah, it's unreasonable to me, but yes, I think it's completely unreasonable. But
okay,
what I would say is
so therefore, if we have a contingent reality, something that's limited, finite, dependent, if it exists, it requires an explanation. So we're looking for what the foundational explanation is. That foundational explanation
the
has
issue
to be
is
something
what I'm
which
saying.
is necessary.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that it is something that we have no answer to, that we will not have an answer to, that we speculate about endlessly. And I would rather leave it to exploring reasonable findings, finding things out, rather than to accept certain speculations that come with certain demands, to even also believe in those. These are things that I cannot really concern myself with, because I think they are a waste of time to me, very honestly.
I just say something on that speculation part. So go ahead.
But this is the point. This is to do with the logical entailment. Yeah, this is like a necessary logical entailment of an argument. Okay. This is not going to be superseded by science. So science is not going to turn around. Science is not going to turn around and say, "Oh, look, I found a particular particle, and therefore we don't need to believe in a necessary foundation to reality," because it will never be. Because what science will look at and what science identifies are contingent realities, things that are quantifiable. So if it's quantifiable and therefore has limitations, it's going to be dependent upon something else and require an explanation. So that's why it's a logical entailment to a necessary being. What Abdul then said, he said, fine, we go from a limited, dependent, contingent pen, and we understand that the universe is limited, contingent, and needs a necessary foundation to reality. What Abdul then said is that this necessary foundation doesn't have any explanation outside of itself, but did an act, an indeterminate act, indeterminacy. How we identify other human beings are conscious and have will is through their indeterminacy. Yeah, they act in a way which is not explained by physical laws per se.
Yeah, Sharif, you're breaking up a little bit.
Not quite.
You're breaking up a little bit, Sharif. I'm not sure if you got what he said there, Advan.
Oh, sorry.
Partially.
So I said how we identify that something has a will is through indeterminate action that cannot be explained through physical, non-conscious laws interacting with each other.
I understand.
So how I know you're a conscious being as opposed to a robot, or a bottle, then it's because obviously the bottle doesn't, undertake indeterminate actions. Yeah, it's determined by some external forces. So this necessary foundation to reality, which is the logical entailment that contingent things require an explanation, itself would act indeterminately because it's not going to be caused outside of itself, because there's nothing outside of itself to make the cause.
Okay, here's the thing. To get back to where I actually made a note about something that Abdul said in line of this whole argument about independent minds, and that minds do not necessarily have to exist, and all that. It is again a field that goes into a lot of more speculation than what we are ready for, or than what I am ready for, to be very honest. What we see in reality is, let me ask you a quick question. Where is the mind? What is the mind? How do you define the mind?
Yeah, but so I can answer that. I can answer that, Ridwan. But the problem is right now that what you're saying on this whole speculation thing, that everything is just speculative on our side, and you've got the hard sciences, so you're good. But then if that was the case, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the way we should approach these discussions, if you provide me with like a materialistic account of the mind, right, the materialist theory of mind, and we had a big podcast on consciousness, if you provide me with that, and it's hugely philosophical, and it involves huge philosophical, what you would call speculation. If you provide me with that, and all I say is I would rather stick to my dualism, which is just much more clear and straightforward, and obviously true from my first person subjective experience, I'd rather not speculate with the science. That wouldn't really be dealing with your arguments. I need to point out what the problems are with your position. In the same way, if you thought that what Jake or Sharif or myself or Yusuf were saying is speculative, I think that's not enough, because from our perspective, this seems convincing. So what you need to do is break it down and say, okay, it's not good for this reason, and the materialist position is better for such and such reasons. So again, just to call the opposing position just speculative is just because clearly it's not convincing to you. You don't hold that position, so it's just trivially true that you find it speculative and unconvincing.
But
it's also trivially
fundamentally speculative.
It's no. No,
isn't philosophy fundamentally speculative? It depends. Mostly speculative.
Yeah. It depends on your view of meta-philosophy, but then, yeah. So, for example, a statement that a certain principle is sufficient reason, or the statement that every cause has an effect, is that speculative? That's philosophy. Is it speculative?
No, I'm not saying everything is speculative about philosophy. I'm saying, isn't it mostly philosophy? Isn't it fundamentally and mostly speculative?
Not fundamentally. It can be. The point is, you point out, you need to be able to distinguish between the speculative from the non-speculative. Okay. And in order to make that distinction, you need to point out, guys, what you're saying here doesn't have sufficient, epistemic justification. You guys are not epistemically warranted in the position you're holding. Because of these reasons, you're just speculating. So you have to have reasons. You can't just say, oh, it's far-fetched, I can't imagine it. I mean, fine, me too, a universe without a God, your atheistic position about morality, for example, I find it completely unacceptable. I find it very speculative for you to.
No, my point about the mind was.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I keep doing this today. But
go ahead. Okay. We've all interrupted each other. It's okay. Go ahead.
My point about the mind was the reason why I asked the question, how you define the mind, is not. I don't want to go into a lengthy discussion on what the mind is and what it is not. The reason is I quickly want to point out why that too is quite similar to what we were arguing before. When I ask you what the mind is, you will probably have different answers of what the mind is, and you will probably have different answers on what the mind depends on. I will stick with the clear findings and the opinions that are still even scientifically controversial in a way, but vastly dominant. I'm taking the courses myself, that the mind is merely an extension of the physical that we have, that the mind is actually what the brain does, a function of the brain, that this is all the mind is. And that if you remove certain things from the brain, or if you remove the brain altogether, then you either alter the mind or you remove and get rid of the mind. There is nothing more.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Ridwan. But the problem is, I hate to break it to you, that's largely philosophical. It's not just scientific.
I understand.
Scientists that think the philosophy in this question is irrelevant are just very bad philosophers, and that's okay because they're scientists. But if you want to engage in philosophy, you should take the philosophy seriously. And neurologists who think that, you know, brain explains mind and they deny the hard problem of consciousness, they just think that the behavioral aspects of humanity exhausts everything about consciousness, and that's just not true. But I think we are going to have to end this because it's been well over 2 hours. I've enjoyed this discussion, so thank you, Ridwan, for coming on, and thank you everybody else. I hope that all the discussions we have about our differences and the different worldviews and different ideologies can be this respectful. I wish that actually these discussions can be in this way, and we don't just strawman each other's positions and present caricatures of each other's positions without actually representing the positions we're trying to critique properly and being respectful that, you know, the person in front of you actually has a rationale for what he's saying. You can break his argument down. You can think it's ridiculous, but at least have that respect to actually represent it properly and not present caricatures of everything you're trying to critique. Of course, that gets more views, but, you know, that's not what we're after. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Ridwan, it was an enjoyable discussion. I hope we can talk again soon.
Can I say a few words before we go?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, first off, for this opportunity. I think this was really great. It was a little bit rough, but it was enjoyable. It was good. It was the first of its kind, which I appreciate very much. I always wanted to get together and have these conversations together. I would love to see such interactions in the future as well, rather than attacking and making fun of each other and all that. So thank you so much for this. I hope to communicate in the future again. I also want to ask, I kind of asked this before the stream as well, but I want to also extend an invitation to you guys, especially to Yusuf and Jake, since I specifically talk about them. I would like to also give them the opportunity to speak for themselves on my channel rather than just me speaking about them. So I would like to extend the invitation for you guys to also come to my channel so that I can ask you questions about your beliefs and about Islam, about your beliefs in God, and so on. I would hope to see that happen as well.
Inshallah.
You're muted.
You're muted, Abdul.
Yeah, you're muted, Abdul. You're muted.
I'm saying thank you for that, Ridwan. I'm saying I think you guys can discuss that in your own time, inshallah. So the panelists, any last words? Sharif?
Yeah, I think, I think it's been an interesting discussion. And I think my advice to Ridwan is this, and I'm going to speak to Ridwan directly, is sometimes the way that you present your videos, the way that you caricature the Islamic arguments, creates a very bitter taste. It doesn't come across sincere. What we try to do on a Thought Adventure podcast is we try to look at the very best arguments for atheism. You know, we want to go to the very top tier. So similarly, if I'm trying to look at and understand or critique, let's say for an outsider point of view, Islam, I'm not going to just critique a very base level argument. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to try to understand the Ijaz al-Quran by Imam Jurjani or Imam Baqillani. Yeah, or I'm going to look at the contingency argument by Imam Juwayni and look at the books like Al-Irshad, which talks about the evidences and the proofs for Islam. And I'm going to try to critique it from that perspective. I'm not just going to go to some random, like from an atheist perspective, from a Muslim perspective, speaking to an atheist. I'm not going to go to my random next door neighbor who happens to be an atheist and say, oh, this is the argument that he's given to me, and look how rubbish it is. So that was my advice to you. And I think in this stream, I think what we've tried to do is demonstrate, and we've done this before, by the way. This is not the first non-Muslim, ex-Muslim that we've had on our stream. Our streams are generally open, and we've had ex-Muslims come on, and we've had fruitful discussions. So it might be the first time for you, but it's not actually the first time for us on this stream. And, we've not had any fighting or slanging matches or anything like that. But I think what we have to do is we have to take any argument seriously in a way where we try to build the argument up, as opposed to going straight to the conclusion and saying, well, it doesn't seem right to me. Yeah, so we need to build the argument. It's like if I was to look at Bell's theorem in quantum mechanics and say, oh, that just seems ridiculous to me. I've got to look at the physics and build the argument of the physics up. So I think it's important. And I think this is what we've tried to do. And I think one thing that maybe we have come to an agreement upon, is that belief in one God is justified. I think that's what you sort of mentioned at the beginning when you spoke to Jake, that it was justified. Yeah, it's justified. It's reasonably justified. You use the word reasonable as well. Yeah, in that, which is a good thing. Yeah. And in order to
but materialism is also justified. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, and I think we've tried to, and we don't want to go back on that, but we tried to demonstrate that contingent things need an explanation to a necessary reality. So, yeah. So, and also the other point I was going to say is that if you're going to look at an internal critique, you have to demonstrate A and not A. And that's not rigidness. That's actually the standard. So, yeah, if you want to say something's incoherent in a linguistic sense, it doesn't make sense in my mind, that's one thing. But if you're going to say it's logically incoherent, then you have to demonstrate A, not A. So I'm just Ridwan for you, so you understand, so that you're able to understand these arguments and maybe present and appreciate them in better. So so that's my 2 pennies.
Sure, you can say something, and then we'll go to Jake and Yusuf.
Well, I think the discussion is very much over, so it would be a little bit unfair to go back to critiquing the points that were made. We would have to go back into the discussion on where we were right and wrong and all that. So I wouldn't want to make any further arguments or assertions about your positions. I think it was quite good today. But I want to say quickly, I just want everyone to understand that my focus with what I'm doing, my activism and my channel, what I call Apostate Prophet, is not atheism or anti-theism. It's also not a critique of the belief in God or in Allah. It is largely, the vast majority of my content focuses, and I always say this explicitly, focuses on Islam specifically, on Islamic scripture, Islamic beliefs, Islamic history, and all that. So this is actually, when it comes to theism, it's actually something that I do not really focus on, that I do. This is very much an exception. So yeah, I focus very much on Islam and the scripture. That's what I do.
Yeah. But you have done 2 debates on proof of God.
What? Sorry?
You've done a couple of debates on the existence of God,
You have done 2 debates.
Yeah, I usually do that with Christians,
I think
because
3 weeks ago you did the recent debate. Yeah,
I think I do it with Christians usually because they invite me, and it's easy to do with them. So I mean, not because
what I would do,
they're easy to talk to.
Yeah, if I'm going to critique Islam, I'm not going to critique it from its rules and say it's immoral. I'm going to critique Islam from its very foundation, and one of the foundational thoughts of Islam or beliefs of Islam is one God. So that's how I'm going to critique. That's how I would do it. Yeah, in the same way, if I'm going to believe in Islam, first thing. Well, yeah. So that's the difference between.
Yeah, that's fine.
Maybe
we
how
don't need to keep going back and forth.
Yeah, so it's okay. Jake, any final words?
No, other than just holding up my pen again. And
hey, I agree with that. Look, I agree with that.
Yeah, so I like this pen.
Contingent. It's contingent. It's a possible thing.
Yeah, so I think it was an interesting conversation, and yeah, maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yusuf.
So the title of the stream was "Is Belief in One God Justified?" I'm pretty sure I heard AP say yes, it is. So
Alhamdulillah.
It's okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so I mean, we're just joking here at the end. AP, we're not trying to score cheap points. It was a good discussion, and belief in God is justified. I think it's just about how important the justifiability, if that's a word, of belief in God, it matters in specifically the discussion you have, Ridwan, because I think even if you're gonna, critique an ideology from whatever aspect, I think it needs to be very clear that, the fundamentals of that ideology are going to influence where you're going to go with your discussions about, whatever branches out from the fundamentals. So it's definitely going to influence it. And I enjoyed this discussion. We can have further discussions, hopefully, on the other stuff you normally discuss in the future. And until then, I want to thank everybody who joined and participated. I want to thank the panelists and Ridwan, and see you guys soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
حي على